How do you describe a wah-wah pedal to somebody who doesn't know what it is? Wacka, 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 wacka. Wah, 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 wah.
The fabulous new Crybaby pedal opens the door to a variety of great new sounds. Here's how it operates. The guitar plugs into the Crybaby pedal with a standard cord. Then the pedal plugs into the amp with another cord. The entire foot goes on the pedal. By rocking the foot back and forth, we get the Crybaby effect.
Well, if someone didn't know what the wah pedal was, of course the first thing you'd say was, have you ever heard shaft?
You think of 70s porn. You know, there it is in a nutshell.
Ooh, ah, wakatu, wakatu.
It's an exciting moment that I wasn't looking for. And all of a sudden I punched this thing in and I got something that I didn't know I had.
I would hit a note and I could feel the row of the people just rise back. They'd come right up with the note out of their chairs.
The wiki wiki, waka waka waka.
Quack, quack, quack.
It goes to the heart of what human communication is kind of all about when it comes to transferring that communication to an instrument.
But it just looks like a gas pedal on a car, and instead of making the car go fast, it makes your guitar sound like a voice.
And it goes wah, wah. And it drives you nuts. Wah, 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 wah. Wah, wah.
The wah-wah was a quiet, kept secret at the time. A lot of people didn't know what was making that sound. They just heard the sound and was like, damn, he's playing his ass off.
You know, the 60s were a time of amazing change, and I think that helped set the tone for what the wah-wah entered into. And it was invented really in the late 60s just in time to be part of the changes going on. And it wasn't just changes in recording studios, but it was changes in the attitudes and the power of the artist.
In the 60s, guitar was hugely popular, but it had reached kind of a plateau, I think, with a lot of pop bands doing kind of the same thing.
My guitar heroes from the late 60s and early 70s, they invented the instrument. Guitar didn't sound like that. You know, before Jimi Hendrix, guitar was a different instrument. Guitar didn't sustain like it did before Hendrix. Guitar didn't feed back before the way Hendrix did it. And one of the ingredients that him and a lot of the people that followed him, not just stylistically, but just in that time, that great magical time, used a wah-wah.
Prior to the wah-wah pedal, in the 1950s, guitarists pretty much had tape delay. And they had tremolo. As things progressed and moved into the 60s, guys had spring reverb. And then they had fuzz. The origin of the wah is an interesting story because I think it is one of those kind of accidental effects. Steel guitars give us some examples of the earliest vocalizing effects for the guitar, an example of which is Alvino Ray in the early 1940s. And then we have Chet Atkins, who recorded some things with a kind of phasey, wah-inflected sound. When I asked him once about how he got that effect, he said he just used the tone control on his guitar. English session guitarist Big Jim Sullivan likely made the first recording of a wah effect in 1961. He may have used just his volume and tone controls. It's not really clear how he got the effect. And people would have to wait until late 1966 before a real wah pedal was developed. It starts with the relationship between Thomas Organ and Vox and a guy named Brad Plunkett.
My name's Brad Plunkett, and
I did invent the wah-wah pedal. That was one of my things that I take some pride in. I went to work for a company called Thomas Organ Company when I was 18 years old. The president of the company, a fellow named Joe Benarin, who was a real entrepreneur, made a deal with Vox in England to allow him to manufacture Vox products in the United States. And pretty soon we were doing engineering on Vox products.
Now, the other kind of thread that it bears some weight is there was a guy named Del Casher who was working with Thomas Organ Company in Sepulveda doing some demo work. He was employed by them at the time. And Del Casher was, I think, the first guy to ever be recorded using that pedal.
When I came to California after college, and I was busy working with everybody from Gene Autry to Lawrence Welk to Record Dates to Motown. And one day I got a phone call and they said, I'm with a company called Warwick Electronics and they're buying a company called Vox. And we're going to have a big ampliphonic orchestra called the Vox Ampliphonic Orchestra. Electric trumpets, electric saxophones, electric flutes, and we'd like to have you play guitar. And he said, by the way, this is no fly-by-night organization. It's owned by Warwick Electronics. Warwick is owned by Whirlpool, and Whirlpool and Warwick Electronics also own Thomas Organ. Every one of us had an amplifier in front of us. At this point, the Vox UK amplifier was the Super Beetle amp, which was a tube amplifier. Warwick Electronics, Thomas Organ said, we got to save money on these things, so let's cut the cost on all this. So one of the things was they noticed a little funny switch that said MRB, the mid-range boost switch.
And the switch was very expensive, about $4. One day I was talking to my boss and he was wondering if I could devise a circuit that would allow the mid-range boost to be tuned with a potentiometer, which only cost about 30 cents. I worked on it for a while in the morning, and in a relatively short time, I had a parallel tuned circuit that I could change the frequency of by rotating a potentiometer.
And what Plunkett did was come up with a circuit that would, basically it was a sweepable EQ, and it just took one pot to do it, and it was brilliant.
So I went next door and asked a friend of mine, John Glennon, if he would plug his guitar into the pile of wires and resistors and capacitors I had on the bench. He strummed a couple of chords and I turned the knob on the potentiometer and it went whack, whack, whack. And we looked at each other, and I won't tell you exactly the words we said, but we said, wow, this is really great. We started thinking about, well, how's the guitarist going to be able to operate this thing? His hands are already busy. And there was a Vox Jaguar organ sitting in front of one of the other engineers' benches. So I said, hey, John, go steal that expression chute volume pedal from Frank's organ, and let's put the pot in there. Pretty soon we were drawing a modest crowd, and everybody agreed that it sounded pretty good, but didn't really know how good it was going to be.
The origin of the name was they were fishing around for something to call it. And somebody at Thomas Organ said, it sounds like a baby crying. And they just turned it around, became the Crybaby.
If you take a look at the wah-wah to a guitar, it's much the same thing that a cup mute does to a trumpet, in the sense that it changes the acoustic cavity in which the sound resonates.
Yeah, the way the wah-wah works essentially is a filter. And it's a filter which is the shape of like a peak, like a mountain. It lets certain frequencies through, but it blocks all the others that are on the side. And depending on the position of the rocker pedal, you move it either down in low frequencies or up in high frequencies. And it's just like your mouth, too. It does the same thing. Your mouth changes shape to produce different frequencies.
The next day, the president of the company sent down word that he wanted to hear this thing. And he said, that sounds like a Clyde McCoy wah-wah trumpet thing. And I thought to myself, what's a Clyde McCoy wah-wah trumpet thing? But
found out later.
And he called Clyde McCoy. And he said, can we give you some money and we'll use your name? And Clyde McCoy was living in Louisiana somewhere. And he said, hey, fine with me. That was it. That was the beginning of Clyde McCoy and the end of Clyde McCoy, other than the fact that Clyde McCoy's name went on the bottom plate of the wah-wah pedal that was commercially released. And he said, this would be perfect for the trumpet. And besides, we got the Vox Ampliphonic Orchestra. We have 4 trumpet players in there. We can have 4 wah-wahs for the trumpet players. We can have 4 wah-wahs for the saxophone player. Wow, we could sell, look at how, we could sell maybe 12 or 14 wah-wah pedals to these Vox Ampliphonic Orchestras. And I said, no, Joe, you don't get it. I said, this is really a guitar thing. So would you let me make a record? So I got my guitar and I got my prototype wah pedal, my only one here, and I wrote the music too, and I used a drummer and I played all the parts myself. I want to describe what the growl of a wah would sound like, what blues would sound like. I thought I covered everything. I even covered the sitar. So I'm so pleased to have been the pioneer of seeing a vision and hearing the vision. And that's why I made the record. And it still sounds good to me today. And I'll let you be the judge, but I think it's pretty good.
So the funny thing about the beginnings of the wah-wah is when it first came out, there was really 2 wah-wahs, the Vox wah-wah and the Crybaby. But everybody thinks that they came from 2 separate entities, 2 separate ideas, 2 separate companies. And in fact, they weren't. A lot of companies, even today, make products which seem like they almost compete with each other, but they really don't because they're made by the same person. It doesn't matter if you buy Vox or buy Crybaby. They still were made by the same company, which was Thomas Organ.
The Vox wah and the Crybaby were exactly the same product from the standpoint of the circuitry and the nature of the components inside. The reason for the creation of the Crybaby was that there were contractual relationships between Thomas/Vox and our dealers, which would preclude the possibility of the Vox product being sold through other outlets. Within about 3 months, the thing was in full production. And we built some of them there in the San Fernando Valley. Then the production was moved to a factory in Italy.
Thomas Organ went to Echo, this company in Italy, and Ennio Uncini was the manufacturing manager at that time. The people at Echo decided they didn't want to make this pedal. So Jen was created by Joe Bernardon and Ennio Uncini, and J was for Joe and EN was for Ennio. So they produced all of the Vox pedals and along with the Crybaby pedals for a while.
And that's where the majority of the wah-wah pedals that I think people, at least historically in terms of collectors, have been looking at.
Jennings Company in the UK distributed it for Europe. Thomas Organ distributed them for the United States.
So they applied for a patent about 3 weeks later in February after I had released the record. And when you apply for a patent, it takes about 3 years to get it approved.
Once the circuit got into Italy, people started copying it, and I think a lot of the offshoots were just a direct result of kind of letting it out of the shop.
Thomas did not enforce the patent. It may be that by the time the management realized that it was important, everybody was making them, and it just would have been too much of an effort to try and shut everybody down.
So the wah-wah was, to me, the new voice of the guitar. And I said, this is it. The older school of producers and musicians really did not see the value to using the wah-wah pedal. I didn't see that happening until the younger players started coming on the scene, and then they started using the wah-wah pedal, and music changed.
first time I really recognized the wah-wah pedal, I would say it would have to be Eric Clapton in the Cream days.
I think that was it, and it was from Disraeli Gears, and it was the song Tales of Brave Ulysses. And what happens is that when you hear something different, and it is a time that is speaking different languages to you, then you do take note.
I've actually heard from a number of people who've told me over the years that Frank was, if not the first, one of the very first people that ever performed with the wah pedal. And I believe it. I mean, he was always looking for different things to embellish what he was doing musically and certainly with his guitar. People have said Del Casher is responsible for it or has a big role in it. He actually played with my dad for a period of time, so he could be the link to how Frank knew about it.
I loved working with Frank Zappa, and he was very innovative. And I said, Frank, you got to buy one of these. And so he did buy one at Manny's in New York, and he took to the wah-wah pedal immediately.
But the thing is, he was also, unlike a lot of other people, well, obviously in many ways, but in the sense that, you know, Frank really used it for tone shaping, and I think it's brilliant because all the mid-range stuff that it can bring into focus for the listener is right where that guitar lives, and I think it's something that will always sound good. It will never ever go out of style to use a wah in that way. I know that some people have talked about whether or not Frank introduced the wah pedal to Jimi Hendrix. They were definitely friends, and they would play together and meet up in different places in New York and London.
The first thing that comes to my mind when someone drops the word wah-wah on me, I think James Marshall Hendrix, for a very simple reason that he was and always will be the complete and utter master of his craft and of the use of the wah-wah, period, end of story.
He just took advantage of all the things that were available to him technically, but he was just doing what was contemporary to him and his experiences at that time. As soon as he was into a proper studio with a knowledgeable engineer like Eddie Kramer, he was off to the races.
I first became aware of the wah-wah when I heard Jimi Hendrix play in 1966 in London. He had just entered the charts with Hey Joe, and then of course the subsequent records had wah-wah all over it. And then I got to work with him in January of '67. So yeah, I was pretty much aware of it then, and it was pretty scary when you hear that sound screaming at you. You go, whoa, what is that?
In the sense of composition, I mean, I think, you know, one of the classic compositions on a Crybaby's got to be Voodoo Child, you know? I mean, that's the first time somebody plugs in a wah-wah pedal, what's the first thing they play? Wow, oh wow, oh wow. I mean, come on, it's almost like you can't help it.
The combination of delay and the way he uses the wah-wah is just amazing to me. I mean, some of the most memorable riffs are done with wah.
And that's not a Marshall amp at this time. This was a Fender. It was a Fender dual showman with 810s in the cabinet. So when he kicks in that wah, it just explodes in the room. You know, it's just got that marvelous visceral sort of feel to it. I think his foot was lightning fast, and just to watch him in the studio do tricks with the guitar and the pedal, and it's all one thing. It never, you couldn't even begin to imagine how the hell did he do that. You think, oh, wait a minute, that's physically impossible, because he was so integrated with the thought process from the brain through the heart, into the fingers, to the feet. It's all one fluid motion, and to be able to have watched him up close, and how much of a genius he was at pulling sounds out of that thing that were just unheard of.
Probably the first time I ever heard it was the same as most people, was probably Hendrix, you know. And then probably the top one is Page.
You know, that classic moment of Dazed and Confused where he hits the two harmonics.
wah, 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 wah. You're just like, that's awesome, it's rad. How do you do, and that's not something any other pedal you can just turn on, it's gonna do it, it's actually, you've got to control that, so it's got a feeling, it's like a human element to it.
My favorite wah-wah moment in history. I think I'd have to say Jeff Beck on Superstitious. That was one of the coolest wah-wah pedal sounds I've ever heard.
Terry Kath, the 25 or 64. I think that was like one of those kind of pivotal wah experiences that's kind of hard to get out of your head.
When someone says wah-wah pedal, the first thing jumps in my mind is the late, great Earl Hooker. He was the first one I saw with the wah-wah pedal long before Jimi Hendrix. And when I saw him play that, he made a record called Wah Wah Blues. And when I heard that, I'm like saying, what's next? I got to go and figure out what I need to make me better.
But yeah, the first time I had ever heard a wah pedal and was actually conscious about it was at this kid's house. He put on a Thin Lizzy album. There was a guitar solo. And I said to my friend, why does his guitar sound like that? And my friend said, oh, he's using a wah-wah pedal. And I thought, wah-wah pedal, what a weird name.
You don't necessarily just have to use it on a guitar. So Geezer Butler on the first Sabbath album, I believe, he did a bass solo using a wah-wah.
It's about the sound and what it makes you feel like when you hear it. And some of the stuff on Black Sabbath records, the bass parts that Geezer played and Tony Iommi's playing, he definitely had a way with using the pedal that sounded different to me than some other people.
But also, Rufus and Shaka Khan. I mean, that was done in a way like, whoa, what's that? You'd think the wah-wah pedal was made for funk.
In the areas of R&B and soul music, I think Sly Stone has to be credited. In his band, I believe, we heard one of the first fusions of the wah-wah sound. He was one of those first artists who broke down the barriers, the genres of music. Norm Whitfield, a staff producer who had worked with the Temptations through their early years, heard what was happening with Sly and the Family Stone and began to put that into the Temptation sound, just at the same time that they were beginning to address social issues with songs like Cloud 9 and Ball of Confusion. There you had a new era for Temptations and for Motown.
I think the first time the wah-wah pedal was used on an R&B soul record is when I played it on Cloud 9 by the Temptations at Motown. I feel kind of a connection with the Crybaby wah-wah pedal because it really got me my shot at Motown playing with the Funk Brothers every day. And how that had happened was I was part of a producer's workshop at Motown. I was hired by James Jamerson, the bass player over there. And one day Norman Whitfield, the producer at Motown, came over and he had the chart to this song called Cloud 9. So he put the chart in front of us and he said, well, let's run this down. He was searching for something. And I just happened to have my trusty Crybaby in my bag of tricks. And I pulled out the wah-wah pedal and I put it on the introduction figure that he had on the chart. And when he heard that wah-wah pedal, he said, that's it, that's what I want. So within 2 weeks, I was at Hitsville and I was recording Cloud 9 with the Temps, and that was it.
When I first got to Motown, I didn't play the wah-wah. But there was a guy named Dennis Coffey that did Cloud 9, Ball of Confusion, all that stuff. And I'm saying, damn. I said, where you get that from? He said, oh, man, it's a wah-wah pedal. You get it such and such. So I went and bought a wah-wah pedal. So I looked at it, and it had the directions, and like up and down, up and down. And I said, whack-on, whack-on, whack-on. I said, but that's all it do? So I said, okay, fine. So I took this damn thing home, and I was like, whack-on, 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 whack. So every time we got a chance to play, we'd be playing, and I said, whack-on, 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 because that's all I knew, because I looked at the direction and said, just go back and forth. And I'll never forget the horn players. They were older guys, because we were young. And they said, I wish he turned that chugga, chugga, wah-wah shit down. I just got to the point I'm saying, I would like to make it sound like something else other than wah-wah, but have control of it, that if I wanted to say wah-wah, it would say wah-wah. Because it's like, it was the 3rd of September, wah, 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 wah.
It was the 3rd of September.
When I did Pop Was Rolling Stone, I was using a Crybaby. And when I was in Motown, everything, all of the work that I did was basically the Crybaby. I did the Jackson 5, Marvin Gaye, like Let's Get It On, Four Tops, Rolls Royce, Car Wash, Barry White Love's Theme, Blondie, Gloria Gaynor, I Will Survive, Peaches and Herb, The Pointer Sisters, Barbra Streisand Main Event, Quincy Jones Body Heat, The Dukes of Hazzard, Death Wish, Charles Bronson. I think what changed my life about the approach that I would take is after I heard Shaft. See, because a lot of people associate me playing Shaft. I didn't play Shaft.
Now, you want to know how Shaft was created? We were in Culver City with Gordon Parks, Isaac Hayes, and I played lead guitar on this particular song, Shaft. We were looking for something that would go with the walk. You know, the walk when you came out of the subway, right? I remember he said, told Willie Hall, the drummer, he said, man, give me some 16th notes. While that was happening, Isaac was at the piano. Ding, you know, ding, trying to create something. Me, I tuned my guitar up, okay? And then I was checking my pedals out. So when I got the fuzz, played down, down, you know, whatever I played, got to that chord, played some stuff, and then got to the wah-wah, and I said, doom, 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 doom. He said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm just tuning up. He said, keep playing that riff. So we worked on it, and then when he changed and said, doom, I changed and went to his key to play the same riff. He said, no, stay on your G. Stay on your G. Whatever I do, don't worry about me. Don't think about me. And then even when he got to do-do-do-do-do-do-do, I still was on G. Do-do-do-do-do-do. And I say, we were doing some other stuff where he was saying, hit me twice, do-do, you know. Oh, do-do-do-do. I'm still on the same run. All through the whole damn entire structure, I haven't changed anything but the flavor of my foot. On the ending, I used the F chord and said, wah, 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 wah. I had to do it then because that was over. And I was so happy to hit that. Wah, 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 wah. I was so damn glad. To me, it seemed repetitious, redundant, and ridiculous. Shows you what you know, all right? And at the time when it came out and I'm hearing it in the car, I still didn't like what I was doing. It was like, why did he let me do all that shit all through the song? You know, but then later on it started hitting on me. It started wearing on me, right? We did not know Shaft was gonna be Shaft. And then he got big and was like, whoa.
I actually saw Isaac Hayes. That was actually my first concert. Isaac Hayes in Young Warwick. And when he played Shaft and that wah pedal part came in, the strobe light came on, and I thought, oh my God, this is just beyond cool. When you're in 5th grade, you know, and you see something like that, it's super impressionable.
A lot of people don't know this. What we recorded for the movie was for the movie. So what you hear on the LP is not the same thing that's on the movie. At that time, I was using a boomerang. Before the movie was released, if I'm not mistaken, we went back to Stax and recorded the same thing all over again. So we used the local musicians and recorded with the Crybaby. So it sounds different when you hear that first piece. They got a boomerang at Stax that they said I play Shaft on. The Crybaby, I don't know where it is. I'm not gonna lie to you. I have no idea. But if anybody find it, hey, they got a piece of work.
I think there has been times when the wah-wah pedal flourished. Like when it first hit the scene, everybody was using it, you know what I mean? Because everybody wanted to sound like their heroes or whatever. Or a specific piece of music, if you were playing it in a band, you had to have that in order to make make it sound real.
Yeah, I think the genres that the wah was able to find its way into are really varied.
It is heard in jazz, it is heard in reggae. Miles Davis had his side players do the wah-wah through their keyboards, for example, and of course he did it through his trumpet, and King Curtis did it through his sax.
Stevie Wonder sounds great with a wah pedal on the clap.
It started out as kind of a rock deal with Hendrix, but before you know it, you've got wah being used in R&B and soul, and finding its way into everything from jingles to X-rated movie soundtracks.
Come and knock on our door. Come and knock on our door. Been waiting for you.
As with anything in music or pop culture, the wah-wah pedal fell out of favor at a certain point.
Probably towards the late 70s, I think it had reached the point where people had heard it a lot, and it kind of went away for a while.
I think what caused the wah to perhaps fall a little bit from popularity was it just got overused.
Well, if you look at the time when bell-bottoms fell out of favor, I think the wah-wah might have gone with it. The two are hand in hand. But I don't know, to me, both of them are always cool.
Well, I think in the beginning it was probably a rebellion against classic rock, right? When I was a kid during the sort of new wave punk rock era, we were, my cover band in high school, we'd be playing the Police or the Ramones or whatever, and I pretty much stopped using the wah.
There was a time where I kind of looked around and said, and then thought to myself, wow, no one else is using wah. Am I like just being an old fuddy-duddy?
If you used the wah pedal, you were kind of a throwback. You weren't moving forward, You were like, oh, you're trying to sound like Led Zeppelin or Jimi Hendrix, and we're going this way now.
Also in the 80s was the rise of the racks. I think guitar players got really seduced into using a lot of rack effects processors, which were just really coming into vogue at the time.
And so what's the next thing? And the next thing is this digital revolution. Now it's electronica coming into the studio.
There were a lot of effects that were coming out like crazy when I was doing sessions in LA. These guys were coming in with pedal boards and you had tons of stuff. Suddenly you had so many effects and carting them around. I think that had an impact on say, how much you may use the wah-wah or try all these effects.
It's another tool in the toolbox, and a lot of other things came along. And as time went on, guitar players, being the seekers that they are, they look for different sounds.
Wah pedals have a particular sound to them, but they also have a bit of a history to them in terms of their dependability in roadworthy situations. They tended to wear out and break or sound different at different stages, so people usually had several of them in case one broke, but the problem is they didn't all consistently sound the same. Some would have a different taper, and you'd play it and like, oh, this one doesn't have the magic feel,
Utilizing it in the beginning, like in the early 60s, that was a primitive piece of gear. Not to say it's not primitive now, because it's basically a simple electromechanical device, but it was the way the components were put together.
They just grabbed whatever was available from whatever manufacturer and put it together. And I think the sound of the pedals changing was much more happenstance by availability of parts. And you see some really interesting inconsistencies that you look at, and most of it has to do with the actual inductor that's inside the pedal.
An inductor can be made out of dozens of different kinds of ferrite metals, and that's one of the things that gives wahs their personality is who made the inductor, what it's made of.
I don't know if I got the order exact, but the Clyde McCoy started with the halos, and then they did it's kind of like a big metal can, looks like a film canister. Then there's the Phasal. The Phasal, though, also came in a bunch of different colors. Then it goes to the TDK and the Stack of Dimes.
If you look at the schematic for the wah-wah pedal, it's 500 millihenry. But, it's plus or minus 10%, man, back then.
So a lot of the designs either suffered or benefited by that. And the way it would suffer is that every pedal would sound different. Yet, what it did create was this magical aligning of parts and the drift to where some pedals just sounded so sweet and others, not so sweet.
Those changes did apparently cause some rather large differences to people who had good ears. I would imagine to the guys who were making the financial decisions, one sounded pretty much as good as the other. And so that had to get sorted out.
As best we can tell, the two wahs created by the engineers at Thomas Organ, the Vox and Crybaby, continued to be produced by Thomas and Vox from factories in Italy, England, and America until the late 70s, when the companies ended their relationship and the pedals were temporarily orphaned.
I can remember around the time that Whirlpool closed up Thomas Organ, and along with it the Crybaby, I just figured, well, that's the end of the wah-wah pedal. And Jim Dunlop wasn't having any of that, apparently.
When I started this company, I worked for 9 years as a part-time job.
For a while there, he was kind of known as the collector of accessories, because if other people had accessories that they made and couldn't manufacture them themselves, they would take them to my dad, and we would end up making them here. And the Crybaby was just one of the first electronic effects that we did.
When I bought the Crybaby pedal in 1982, it was off the market, I think, 6 months. Rose Morris at that time in England, who was a distributor, purchased the Vox name, but they didn't want to buy the Crybaby pedal because they didn't want to get into the accessory business. So I thought, I'm up for that. And so I called the vice president of Whirlpool, and he said, well, if you give me some more money than I'm getting right now, you can have it, because he was tired of having it.
I think Whirlpool's a big company that wasn't really into the music business, you know, and I think it was just this one little bastard child that was out there that really wasn't making the returns that they expected, and it seemed like it was abandoned, you know, at the low point in the late 70s.
All the tooling was in Sepulveda. We picked it all up and brought it back to Benicia. And when we got into the Crybaby in the beginning, we struggled with it. But we got it back, I believe, in around about 9 months.
I went to a NAMM show and saw the stand there, and I was very pleased to know that somebody else was going to be doing the original one. I mean, there were certainly enough knockoffs.
You know, that was our baby. We picked it up and we brought it back to life.
You know, it's a simple circuit, and it uses a few amount of components, and nobody was thinking years ago the wah pedal being on a 100-foot stage with the gear all behind in a modern, you know, stage production. Well, that circuit needs a little help when you start putting it there.
The potentiometers were a high failure mechanism which relied on an old pot that was built for the military.
That's the thing that takes the hit, you know, is the pot itself.
Because as you geared it down, it would just rub up against this thing, and if it got dirty, any kind of dust or anything got on, it would be making noise.
They started using nice sealed pots
that normally will exceed well and beyond 3.5 million cycles.
That's a lot of cycles. That's a lot of wah-wahs, you know.
From the knowledge that I gained over the years, having to modify wahs or just keep them working, or just these certain simple things like
the jacks have been improved.
A switch that cycles over 500,000 cycles.
An AC adapter.
And inductors that were quiet, non-microphonic.
So that they don't act they're not quite as radio antenna-like.
Putting in a proper 100% bypass switch in so that your signal that feeds the thing's not loaded by the circuit even though it's bypassed.
Light emitting diodes that tell you the Crybaby whether it's on or off.
Well, I think the biggest thing that Dunlop did was introduce the 535Q. I think that was the most adjustable and flexible wah you could buy at the time. The inclusion of controls to adjust the frequency and a control to adjust the bandwidth gave players the ability to truly personalize the wah.
I was, 23 working on that pedal, you know, and it was like, you know, what do we do now, you know? So we put the preamp boost in it, let's put a 5-position switch. Let's throw it all in there. Let's make it the kitchen sink.
That little bit of tweakability there, in terms of having different voices that you could switch between, and the ability to go inside if you want and fine tune it, because that's what a tweaker does. You want to make something your own.
What I used to do though with my wah-wahs is it has like these teeth that make the pot turn. I would always change the setting from the factory setting, and because I don't like it for it to go really bright.
I guess there's a wheel or something in the inside, and it sets how trebly it gets, and I needed more high end on it. So I took it apart, and I had a guy who was a little more technically orientated than me fix that wheel inside so that it went a little further.
If anything, what it's already existing, you just try and tweak it or make it thicker sounding. So, with my pedal, with the rocker, you got more high end and there's more low end. So it's just scooped out more.
I mean, a lot of wah pedals, they have wider sweeps. I don't really go for that.
I know Hendrix changed his to make it a slightly lower tone than the original Crybaby.
Well, certainly Jimmy's pedals were tweaked. Roger Mayer would get in there with a screwdriver, take it all apart, and mess with the resistors, the capacitors, put different little transistors in, screw around with the response of the pedal. I mean, he would change all kinds of crap in there just to give it a different feel.
Now you can just have like a rotary switch on some that just changed the cue, and or if you had a little screwdriver out and changed the little pot there, and it's like, that kind of stuff has become a common thing for people to know about and do, but it's through years of other people's experience that those ideas have been implemented in the pedal.
As with anything in pop culture, everything is full circle. So with a Stevie Ray Vaughan or someone like that coming along and reviving it, suddenly it's what's old is new again. That's what happened with the pedal. It goes down and comes back up.
Certainly on his remake of Voodoo Child, but also on Soul to Soul. In fact, I've heard that Stevie put 2 wah pedals together and worked them both simultaneously. And I don't know if that's absolutely true, but it makes a good story.
Kind of the 80s were kind of wah-wah free, maybe, or not used very often, I should say. And then when the Seattle scene hit and all, Alice in Chains, and then the heavier guys like Metallica and all this, they started using it in solos, and it came back into vogue again. Those guys were using it in a new and tasteful way and became fresh again.
It was just like a natural thing for me to do, like, using a guitar pick or using a guitar strap. As far as I'm concerned, that the ship probably sailed out and came back, and I didn't even notice. I was still sitting there on the docks, going wacka 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 wacka.
I think I may have had one before I met the guys in Alice, but in like the end of '87. But that's when I completely fell in love with it. There's quite a few of our songs which are totally based off of Crybaby riff. Man in the Box being the first and most obvious one. I think I laid that down on a 4-track or whatever, and then I started messing around with it, and I think I came up with that line almost immediately. And it's just a simple little note run. There's nothing really special about it, but what makes it come alive is the Crybaby, and then also layering a little bit of a talk box behind it. It really makes it speak. So many guys use it and use it well. I really dig how Slash plays, and his solo work with a Crybaby is pretty amazing.
It's, sometimes it's in vogue, and then it'll be out of vogue for a minute and whatnot. I just been using it because I'm able to express myself in a certain way with the wah-wah pedal that is very important to me. So I just stick with it regardless. I don't care whether it's in vogue or not.
I think why it's still around and why it still works, and just like beer and pretzels and peanut butter and jelly, certain things just are not going to go out of style. The Marshall, a Les Paul, Strat, and wah-wah pedal. Can't beat it, man. And it's really good for the weight distribution. Like if you want to, if you're locked out of your car, tossing it out the window and stuff like that, getting into the car. It's very effective.
So many different artists from so many different schools of music can come along with engineers and producers and arrangers, and find a use for it that is, in their hands, maybe brand new.
For me, the most like signature thing I've done, I think, with the wah pedal is this intro to the song, Damn Blue Collar Tweakers, where it just sounds like a loop of some kind of like siren or something. It just goes. I was just sitting around playing a chord that I stole from Robert Fripp. It's ugly, and taking the wah pedal and going. And it's, as soon as we did that in rehearsal, I was like, oh man, this is the whole new thing here with this pedal. I can do this all day. I got a whole new vocabulary now.
There's lots of people that had a different take on it. A 12-year-old kid could go into a guitar store because he heard Nirvana, or he heard grunge music where people were making these sounds that just sounded really distorted, and then there was some wah filtering, but it wasn't the kind that you would hear on a porn tape or some other thing. It was the kind of thing that just jumped out of the speakers in an aggressive way, and that's what appealed to a lot of kids. And they said, now I want to use it for sound effects, but not the typical thing.
A lot of guys, even if they don't move the wah pedal a lot, they'll find this, like a sweet spot.
Like a sweet spot.
The sweet spot.
The sweet spot.
Michael Schenker does this all the time. He finds that sweet spot, and he plays the most blistering stuff.
I think Michael Schenker used one that was kind of clicked on all the time.
And fixed in a position to give them this certain tone.
Just sort of, it's more like an EQ, but it has a special character that no EQ has other than a wah-wah.
I saw him when I was a kid, and I remember he had a wah, and it didn't look like the wah went the whole way. I remember watching like close at San Diego Sports Arena, and Michael Schenker's wah looked like it only went from here to here, but he was on it all the time.
And it was a really unique sound that he had, and a lot of people used to try and get it, but they didn't know that that's how he was doing it.
I don't start with the wah at the beginning of the chain. The wah comes a little further down the chain.
I plug my guitar into it and everything else after. It's just the first thing.
Yeah, I always liked it first. I don't know. I mean, it worked, so I didn't mess with it.
And I like to put some distortion boxes and such that happen before the wah pedal, okay, not after, because I want to filter the distorted sound.
But I just have the wah right at the end of the chain there. It's just for harmonics a lot of times, and then for, like you said, solo boosts and stuff like that, for the treble boosts and everything like that.
It always goes at the very end of everything, because I like any effects, I want them to go through that at the end. I don't want like a wah sound then go into a phaser. To me, it just starts to lose everything. And
I like to use the wah-wah as an effect while I'm mixing. If, for instance, I find that there's a really cool part that the wah has not been used, I'll incorporate the wah-wah, I'll bring it into a patch bay here, and bring it through the console, and I'll actually set it up in such a way that I'll find my high point and low point, and I'll just go. After I've done the effect of the wah, then I'll put a pan on it, and then I'll hand pan it from side to side so it goes in time with the how much I've gone up and down. The pan will go left to right, which is kind of what I did with Jimmy, because if you listen to some of the wah-wah things that I did with Hendrix, I used the pan to project the wah all the way across, and then if he's doing wap wap wap, I'll do wap 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 like that, whip it back and forth.
I like to do things like on some songs on records, I plug the guitar into it, and then into the pedals, and then into the amp. But a lot of times I'll take and I'll plug them in after. I'll go into the distortions and I'll overdrive the heck out of the input of the wah. And I describe it as a sound of like if you have a giant pipe full of water and it's full of pressure, and then you're trying to squeeze that into a teeny tiny pipe, which is the wah, and then as you move it, it's like opening of water valves, and that's when the wah starts to really sound like a massive amount of frequency. I use it then almost as a tone generator, like as opposed to wow, wow, wow.
And then of course, last but not least, classic wah-wah. Gotta do it. Sometimes you might want to make the guitar sing and scream. Sometimes you might just want to make a racket with it. And what it's basically is octave fuzz with the wah kicked in. So you get some serious noise going. Check it out. Basically just used for noise. Right now, I think I just want to go drink a double off of it. So I'm about out of here. Y'all need something else?
I think anybody who wants to learn how to incorporate the Crybaby into their setup basically has to get a pretty good understanding of what it is that they're going for, and then just sort of toy around with it till it sounds right to you. Crybaby is a very personal effect, and the way that it sounds is totally at the mercy of the user. So you have to figure out what it is that you want to get out of it and then try and pull that off.
The degree that you take it to depends on your rhythms within yourself. Like I say, you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's wah-wah playing, but it's not creating in the wah-wah that you can do. You can do creations, but you have to have it in your feet.
But probably the main advice, you know, I'm sure anybody who stands next to somebody who's never used a wah pedal before is don't overuse it.
You can't overuse it. It has been overused. And in all fairness, I gotta be the guy that says this. I have heard it overused where, like, there are guys that can't play a solo without it. But, you know, used tastefully, it's one of the sweetest things you can have in your rig.
And again, it's part of your musical voice. You got to make it part of, just like coming up with a new riff. Now suddenly it's a new riff, maybe with the wah-wah pedal, and each individual has to come to what are they trying to communicate.
I look at all of the pedals that I use, it's like different languages. And the wah-wah pedal express one language, the fuzz express another one. The phase shifter just kind of mellows everything out.
I think a lot of people get hung up on gear, like the guitar you play, the Crybaby you play, the amps you play through, and that's a part of it. But it's the individual uniqueness really comes from your hands, you know, and it really does, the voice of the guitar. So I don't think a Crybaby is really going to change your style, but it's maybe going to amplify what you already are and give you more options.
And please believe me, it's a learning thing. It's like when you learn how to play the guitar, piano, whatever it is, each and every day you learn something about the special effects that you did not know about, and I'm still learning at it.
It's just an extension, you know, any effect, flanger, phaser, wah-wah, they're just they help you express whatever you're trying to speak, you know, whatever you're trying to say, whatever message you're trying to deliver through your playing or emotion, or, you know.
And I think people that even don't play guitar can watch somebody on stage and they can see their foot moving and they can hear the effect being generated as they're moving their foot and seeing their fingers work the fretboard while this effect is changing the frequencies that they're hearing. And I think that's just very unendingly captivating for people.
It's a dynamic thing, so every moment is new. You can never replicate perfectly a wah-wah passage. That's what makes it organic, and that's what makes it timeless.
I can't see it going away. It's just too easy to use, too fun to hear. It's so flexible for the artist to make use of and to add to their creative palette.
This pedal is a pretty simple concept, but it sounds so different the way different people play it. That just speaks to the creativity of musicians in general, but how this one pedal can work in so many different ways for so many people and for so many different instruments, and make so many people say, man, that sounds cool.
It's great at making faces too, and that's one of my favorite things about playing rock music. I always recommend, if you're a guitar player, make as many faces as you can and link them up to the sounds. And the wah-wah is just going to take that and multiply it by 10.
Where did I get my first crybaby? Not sure. I probably got it used off one of my buddies that was another guitar player in the neighborhood or something like that, you know, back in New Jersey somewhere. But yeah, well, you know how it is when you're a kid, just saving up all your dough, mowing lawns, and you know, whatever else you got to do, pumping gas.
I worked in high school selling Christmas trees one Christmas at a grocery store.
I borrowed some money from my aunt and I bought my first crybaby. I think it was like $30 or something. I remember I had to work the money off, mowing the lawn and doing various, you know, around the house chores.
You know, I used to have a wah-wah and it had a switch on it and it went oi oi too. It was really bizarre. Never seen one again. I guess wah. People preferred wah instead of oi oi. So
I don't leave. It's like the American Express card, man. I don't leave home without it.
Have you ever used a crybaby to get out of a jam, like break a window in your car to get the keys out or something like that?
No, I've bartered for wine with them before.
Oh, that's awesome.
I just know that if a guitar player walks in the studio with a great sounding wah-wah and knows how to use it, he's my man.
If I had to do a show, that's the one thing I would have to have. Not even a guitar. A microwave, you know, I don't know, flashlight.
I know I didn't start this whole thing thinking I was gonna dedicate my life to a wah-wah pedal, but so far it's kind of turned out to be that way.
Every time I hear some songs, I listen to hear if somebody's gonna pop up with a wah-wah. I'm addicted, I think.